The interrogation room in Ouagadougou wasn't supposed to reveal this. Paul-Henri Damiba, the exiled coup leader dragged back from Togo, just named names. A 125,000 pesos guide. Nigerian intermediaries. An active hit on President Ibrahim Traoré. And Moscow? They're not staying quiet. Russia just issued a public condemnation, calling it foreign-backed destabilization, which means the Kremlin knows something the rest of us don't. This isn't about one failed plot. This is about who controls the Sahel and what happens when a president refuses to play by the old rules. Damiba's talking. The money's traced. And the fallout? It's just starting. The interrogation room in Ouagadougou is not supposed to exist in this form. Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, the man who seized power in a coup less than 3 years ago, the officer who promised salvation from jihadist violence and then fled into exile when his own military turned against him, is now sitting across from intelligence officials in the capital he once controlled. But this is not a routine debriefing of a deposed leader. This is not about settling old scores or closing a chapter of Burkina Faso's turbulent recent history. What Damaba is revealing, according to sources close to the interrogation, is the architecture of an active assassination plot against the current president, Ibrahim Traoré, a conspiracy allegedly funded with $125,000 and traced back to Nigerian networks operating across West Africa. The extradition of Damaba from Togo was already unprecedented, a violation of the unspoken code that protects fallen African leaders who seek refuge in neighboring capitals. But his return has unleashed something far more destabilizing than anticipated. He is not just answering for his own actions during his brief and chaotic tenure in power. He is exposing a network naming intermediaries and providing details of a cross-border operation designed to decapitate Burkina Faso's government at a moment when the country is attempting to reclaim sovereignty over its security, its resources, and its strategic alliances. Moscow's reaction came swiftly and with unusual clarity. In a statement released through official channels, Russian diplomatic representatives condemned what they described as foreign-backed destabilization efforts targeting the Sahel, specifically calling out external actors who seek to undermine governments that have rejected Western security frameworks. The language was unambiguous. Russia framed Damiba's revelations not as internal Burkinabe drama, but as evidence of a broader campaign to sabotage the region's pivot away from former colonial powers and toward new partnerships. The Kremlin's positioning is deliberate. By publicly backing Traoré's government and framing the alleged assassination plot as part of a pattern of interference, Moscow is signaling that it views the Sahel as a theater of strategic competition, one where coups, exiles, and political violence are no longer isolated incidents, but coordinated moves on a continental chessboard. This is where the stakes become clear. If Damiba's testimony is accurate, if the $125,000 trail leads where investigators believe it does, then Burkina Faso is not dealing with a rogue operation or a personal vendetta. It is dealing with a calculated attempt to reverse the country's political trajectory by eliminating the leader who has most visibly broken with the old order. Nigeria's alleged role in this conspiracy is the detail that transforms the entire narrative from domestic intrigue into regional crisis. Burkina Faso and Nigeria are not traditional rivals. They do not share a hostile border. They are not engaged in open diplomatic conflict. But they occupy very different positions in West Africa's evolving power structure. Nigeria remains the economic and demographic giant of the region, deeply integrated into Western security partnerships, hosting major U.S. military engagement programs, and maintaining close ties with France despite recent tensions. Burkina Faso, under Traoré, has done the opposite. It expelled French troops, ended long-standing defense agreements, and turned to Russia for military hardware, training, and political support. The divergence is not just ideological. It is structural. Traoré's government represents a challenge to the framework that has governed the Sahel for decades, a framework in which regional powers like Nigeria were expected to align with Western priorities in exchange for aid, diplomatic backing, and security assistance. If Nigerian actors, whether state-linked or operating through private networks, are indeed involved in funding an assassination plot against Traoré, The implications extend far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. The $125,000 figure is specific enough to be credible and large enough to fund serious operational capacity. This is not the cost of a single gunman or a desperate lone actor. This is the kind of money that buys coordination, logistics, safe houses, weapons, intelligence gathering, and the recruitment of insiders. Damiba's interrogation reportedly includes details about how the funds were transferred, who received them, and what stages of the operation had already been completed before his extradition disrupted the timeline. The fact that he is providing this information suggests either a genuine attempt to secure leniency or a recognition that his silence would no longer protect him. Either way, the intelligence being extracted from him is now circulating among security agencies across the region, and the responses are beginning to take shape. Burkina Faso's government has not publicly named Nigeria in connection with the plot, but the silence is tactical, not accidental. Ouagadougou is building a case, gathering evidence, and likely coordinating with external partners before making formal accusations that could trigger a diplomatic rupture. Russia's condemnation of the affair is not neutral commentary. It is a political move designed to reinforce Traoré's legitimacy and position Moscow as the defender of Sahel sovereignty against what it characterizes as neo-colonial interference. The Kremlin has spent years cultivating relationships with military governments across the region, offering security assistance without the governance conditions that Western donors typically impose. In Mali, Russian mercenaries and military advisors have become central to counterinsurgency operations. In Burkina Faso, Moscow has supplied weapons and training as Traoré's government attempts to push back jihadist groups without relying on French or American support. The alleged assassination plot, from Russia's perspective, is not an isolated crime. It is part of a broader effort by Western-aligned actors to destabilize governments that have rejected the old security architecture. By framing the conspiracy in these terms, Moscow is doing more than supporting Traoré. It is constructing a narrative in which resistance to Western influence is met with sabotage, and in which Russia's presence in the Sahel is not opportunism, but a necessary counterweight to external aggression. What happens next could redefine the region. If Burkina Faso formally accuses Nigerian networks of funding the assassination plot, the fallout will ripple through ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, an organization already fractured by the wave of military coups that has swept the Sahel since 2020. ECOWAS suspended Burkina Faso after Traoré's takeover, along with Mali and Niger, creating a bloc of military-led governments that have increasingly coordinated their foreign policies in opposition to the regional body's traditional leadership. Nigeria is ECOWAS's most powerful member, and its government has been vocal in condemning the Sahel juntas, calling for rapid returns to civilian rule and threatening intervention in cases where coup leaders refuse to step down. An accusation that Nigerian actors attempted to assassinate Traoré would not just strain bilateral relations. It would expose the deep structural fault lines running through West Africa's political landscape, lines that separate governments aligned with Western security frameworks from those seeking alternatives. Damiba's role in this unfolding crisis is complex and contradictory. He was once the face of Burkina Faso's military frustration with civilian leadership, the officer who promised to turn the tide against jihadist violence and restore national dignity. His coup in January 2022 was initially welcomed by many Burkinabe who believed the previous government had failed to protect them. But Damiba's tenure was brief and ineffective. Jihadist attacks continued, displacement increased, and within months, junior officers led by Traoré overthrew him, accusing him of incompetence and excessive deference to foreign powers, particularly France. Damiba fled to Togo, where he was granted asylum and largely disappeared from public view. His extradition was a seismic event in its own right, a signal that exile would no longer guarantee safety for deposed leaders in the region. But his testimony has transformed him from a historical footnote into a central figure in a live conspiracy. Whether he was a willing participant in the assassination plot or merely a node in a larger network is still unclear. What is certain is that his knowledge of the operation, its funding sources, and its intended execution has made him invaluable to Traoré's government and deeply dangerous to those who organized it. The broader context of this moment cannot be separated from the collapse of the old security order in the Sahel. For years, France anchored counterterrorism efforts in the region through Operation Barkhane, a military mission that deployed thousands of troops across Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Chad. The operation was meant to prevent the expansion of jihadist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, groups that have exploited weak governance, porous borders, and ethnic grievances to build insurgencies that have killed thousands and displaced millions. But Barkhane became a symbol of failure. Despite years of French military presence, jihadist violence escalated, civilian casualties mounted, and the populations of the Sahel grew increasingly resentful of foreign troops who seemed unable or unwilling to deliver security. The wave of coups that began in Mali in 2020 and spread to Burkina Faso and Niger was driven in part by this frustration. The military officers who seized power argued that civilian governments had outsourced national security to foreign forces who did not share their interests and could not win their wars. Traoré's government represents the most radical expression of this critique. He has not just ended cooperation with France. He has actively sought alternatives, turning to Russia for military support and building alliances with other Sahel juntas to resist external pressure. This strategic realignment has alarmed Western governments and their regional allies. The presence of Russian mercenaries and advisors in the Sahel is seen as a direct challenge to Western influence, a foothold for Moscow in a region that was once firmly within the French sphere. The United States, which has invested heavily in security partnerships across West Africa, views the trend with deep concern. American drone bases, training programs, and intelligence sharing arrangements are predicated on working with governments that align with U.S. counterterrorism priorities. When those governments are overthrown and replaced with juntas that reject Western frameworks, the entire architecture of regional security is called into question. The alleged assassination plot against Traoré, if linked to actors aligned with Western interests, would represent an escalation in the struggle over the Sahel's future. It would suggest that some forces are willing to use violence, not just diplomatic pressure or economic sanctions, to reverse the region's geopolitical shift. The $125,000 trail that Damaba is reportedly exposing raises questions about who exactly is behind the plot. Nigerian actors, if involved, could include a range of possibilities. State security agencies operating covertly, private military contractors with regional portfolios, political figures with strategic interests in maintaining the old order, business networks that stand to lose from Burkina Faso's resource nationalism and policy shifts, or intelligence operatives acting on behalf of external powers who prefer to keep their hands clean by using regional proxies. The ambiguity is deliberate. Plausible deniability is built into the structure of such operations. But the specificity of the funding, the details of the coordination, and the cross-border logistics required to execute an assassination in Ouagadougou all point to an operation with significant backing and institutional support. This is not the work of amateurs. It is the work of professionals who understand intelligence, security, and political violence. Moscow's public condemnation of the plot serves multiple purposes. It reinforces Russia's narrative that Western powers and their allies are actively working to undermine Sahel governments that reject their influence. It positions Moscow as a protector of sovereignty and a reliable partner for leaders like Traoré, who are navigating hostile external environments. And it sends a message to other regional actors that Russian support comes with political backing, not just weapons and training. The Kremlin is not interested in abstract ideological solidarity. It is interested in building durable partnerships with governments that can provide strategic value, whether through access to resources, basing rights, or geopolitical leverage against Western competitors. Traoré's Burkina Faso, isolated from ECOWAS, at war with jihadist insurgents, and increasingly reliant on Russian military assistance, fits that profile. If the alleged assassination plot had succeeded, Russia would have lost a key partner, and the narrative of Sahel sovereignty would have suffered a major setback. By framing the conspiracy as foreign-backed destabilization, Moscow is defending its own interests as much as Traoré's government. The extradition of Damaba was already a violation of regional norms. African leaders have long understood that exile provides a safety valve, a way to remove destabilizing figures from power without resorting to violence or prolonged legal battles. The unwritten rule was simple: if you lose power, you leave the country, and you are granted asylum somewhere nearby. This system has allowed dozens of coups, counter-coups, and regime changes to unfold without triggering cycles of revenge or mass bloodshed. But Traoré's government has broken that rule. By securing Damiba's extradition from Togo, Ouagadougou has signaled that exile is no longer guaranteed protection, that former leaders can be brought back to face interrogation, trial, or worse. The precedent is dangerous for every political figure in the region who has ever contemplated fleeing rather than fighting to the death. It is also a demonstration of Traoré's growing confidence and the weakness of institutions like ECOWAS that once would have intervened to prevent such a move. Togo's decision to hand over Damaba suggests either coercion, inducement, or a recognition that protecting him was no longer worth the diplomatic cost. The revelations emerging from Damiba's interrogation are being treated as state secrets, but enough has leaked to confirm the broad outlines of the conspiracy. The $125,000 was allegedly transferred in stages, using financial channels designed to obscure the origin of the funds. Nigerian intermediaries, some with known ties to regional intelligence networks, were reportedly involved in coordinating logistics and identifying operatives inside Burkina Faso who could be recruited or coerced into participating. The target date for the assassination, according to some sources, was tied to a specific political event or public appearance by Traoré, a moment when security protocols might be predictable or when the symbolic impact of his death would be maximized. The operation was sophisticated enough to require months of planning, surveillance, and preparation. Its disruption, triggered in part by Damiba's extradition, suggests that the plotters were caught off guard by the speed and decisiveness of Traoré's government. Is this a strategic move or the start of a larger shift? The exposure of the alleged assassination plot, the involvement of Nigerian actors, and Russia's vocal condemnation are not isolated developments. They are symptoms of a deeper reconfiguration of power in West Africa, a reconfiguration driven by the collapse of old security partnerships, the rise of military governments that reject Western influence, and the entry of new external actors like Russia and increasingly China into regional affairs. The Sahel is no longer a peripheral concern. It is a contested space where competing visions of governance, sovereignty, and security are colliding. The consequences of this collision are being felt in diplomatic ruptures, military realignments, and now, potentially, in assassination plots and covert operations designed to eliminate leaders who threaten the status quo. Traoré's survival, both political and physical, depends on his ability to navigate this treacherous landscape. He has built his legitimacy on the promise of sovereignty, the rejection of foreign military presence, and the restoration of national pride. But he governs a country that is still fragile, still under siege from jihadist insurgents, still struggling with poverty, displacement, and weak institutions. The alleged assassination plot, if fully exposed and linked to Nigerian networks or external backers, will provide him with a powerful political weapon. It will allow him to argue that his government is under attack not because it has failed, but because it has succeeded in challenging the old order. It will justify closer ties with Russia, stricter security measures, and a more aggressive stance toward regional rivals. But it will also deepen Burkina Faso's isolation, reduce the space for diplomatic compromise, and increase the likelihood of further violence. The end of silent coups and protected exiles is not a metaphor. It is a concrete shift in how power is contested and defended in the Sahel. Damiba's extradition and interrogation are the clearest signals, yet that the old rules no longer apply. Leaders who lose power can no longer assume they will be allowed to live quietly in exile, collecting stipends and avoiding accountability. Networks that once operated with impunity, funding coups or assassinations through regional proxies, are now being exposed and dismantled. And external powers that once dictated security policy in the region are finding that their influence is contested, not just diplomatically, but through intelligence operations, military partnerships, and political backing for governments that refuse to comply. The $125,000 plot, whether it succeeds in the courtroom or the court of public opinion, represents a turning point. It is the moment when the conspiracy stops being whispered about and starts being documented, when the networks are named and the intermediaries are arrested, when the proxies are disavowed and the backers are forced to defend their actions. Russia's response is calibrated for maximum political impact. By condemning the plot as foreign-backed destabilization, Moscow is positioning itself as the defender of Sahel sovereignty, while also warning other regional actors that interference will not go unanswered. The Kremlin understands that its influence in the region depends not just on military hardware or mercenary deployments, but on credibility. If Traoré is assassinated despite Russian support, Moscow's claim to be a reliable partner will be severely damaged. If he survives and the plot is exposed, Russia's narrative of Western-backed sabotage will be reinforced. The stakes for Moscow are not just about Burkina Faso. They are about the entire Sahel and the broader competition for influence across Africa. Every government that has turned to Russia for security assistance, every junta that has expelled Western troops, every country that has considered breaking with old colonial ties, is watching to see whether Moscow can protect its partners or whether they are left vulnerable to external revenge. The geopolitical chessboard in West Africa is no longer defined by predictable alignments or stable partnerships. It is defined by flux, by the sudden emergence of new threats and new alliances, by the collapse of institutions that once managed regional crises, and by the willingness of actors on all sides to use covert operations, assassination plots, and proxy wars to achieve strategic objectives. Damiba's revelations, if they hold up under scrutiny, confirm what many have suspected but few have been able to prove: that the struggle over the Sahel's future is being fought not just in public speeches and diplomatic summits, but in interrogation rooms, financial networks, and cross-border conspiracies. The $125,000 plot is not the only such operation underway. It is simply the one that has been exposed. What this means for Nigeria, for Burkina Faso, for ECOWAS, for Russia, and for the broader region is still unfolding. The accusations will be denied, the evidence will be contested, and the diplomatic fallout will be carefully managed. But the facts are now in motion. Damaba is talking. The networks are being mapped. The intermediaries are being identified. And the question is no longer whether external actors are trying to destabilize Sahel governments, but whether those actors can continue operating with impunity or whether they will finally be held accountable. The viewer should leave this story understanding that the Sahel is not descending into chaos randomly or inevitably. It is being shaped, contested, and fought over by governments, intelligence agencies, military factions, and external powers who all believe they have a stake in the outcome. The assassination plot against Traoré, the extradition of Damaba, and Russia's public condemnation are not endpoints. They are inflection points in a much longer struggle, one that will determine whether the Sahel can chart its own course or whether it remains a battleground for forces that care more about control than sovereignty.